Hello and welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast about cooperation, conflict, and culture at work. Today, I speak with Claude-Hélène Mayer. Claude-Hélène Mayer is a professor in Industrial and Organisational Psychology at the University of Johannesburg. She's a board member of the International Academy of Intercultural Research and holds doctoral degrees in psychology, management, and cultural anthropology. In addition to her academic work, Claude also works as a psychologist, management consultant, systemic therapist, mediator, and intercultural specialist. With her broad academic and practical experience, I think that she is a great guest to discuss the chances and the challenges of working across cultures and borders. And I look forward to do that with you, Claude. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm also very happy to be in your podcast today.
Nice. It's very nice to have you. So, Claude, you have a lot of research areas that I also saw through your books. You published several books about different topics, including transcultural mental health, transcultural conflict management and mediation, women in leadership, shame and love across cultures, psychobiography, and several more. And you're also very active outside academia, not only as a psychologist and systemic therapist, but also as a mediator, as a conflict counselor for international companies, family businesses. And you also work as a coach for professionals and managers in international contexts. So my first question would be, how did you end up doing all of what you do professionally?
Thanks very much, Paul. I actually was always very interested in cultures, and I grew up in a Turkish and Yugoslavian area in Germany, and I wanted to study culture, and this is what I did. And I studied intercultural didactics, looking at how you can actually train and educate people of diverse backgrounds. And this is the topic that spans across all my research topics and also my practical work. So yeah, I looked at culture, and I always wanted to live on the African continent. And this is why I moved to different countries, first Tanzania, Kenya, then South Africa. And I started to explore, especially women in leadership. I started to look at the life and the life narrations of different extraordinary people. And yeah, this is how I got into the different areas. I always found when I looked at one topic, oh, there's another very interesting topic, and then I explored the next one, and this is how I accumulated a lot of the different topics.
And it seems to me that still culture is kind of at the core of most of the things you do, right?
Absolutely. I think culture is really one very interesting aspect which combines the individual with a group. And this is why I always was very interested to find out how actually individuals function within their social cultural context and how it impacts actually on what they are doing and how people live their lives.
Right. I would like to talk a bit about intercultural competence with you. I have the feeling that there are very different opinions about that. I feel that some people think that it's not really necessary, that it's just all people are the same or everybody's different, whatever, but culture is not such a big fact that you have to train or learn or something. And there are other people who think that it's the most important and intercultural competence is the first thing you should learn in school and everything. I would like to ask you, why do you think is intercultural competence so relevant?
Yeah, I think intercultural competence is actually a competence that combines so many different competences, like the individual competences we've got, the cultural aspects, the social aspects, the team aspects. And because it's such a complex competence, I believe it's so important. And it combines so many of our personal issues we need to look at in life. And looking at different kind of concepts of intercultural competence, there are some core aspects which I believe are so important in life, like, for example, empathy or being open-minded. These aspects are so important, and this is why I believe intercultural competence as a complex field of expertise for each and every individual person is so complex. But I agree with you that there are voices that say it's more important to look at the personality, and others say it's more important to actually look at the group aspects and the competences we need to interact with each other.
So I understood you in the sense that you say intercultural competence is a useful tool to learn, in the end, skills or values like empathy. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it is part of it. I believe intercultural competence is so important to know, maybe, and to have tools, as you say, to interact with people from different cultural backgrounds and groups. And since our societies are so diverse today, and our schools and our higher education fields, our work areas are so complex and diverse, I believe we need to have these competences to deal with the diversity, break down the complexities, being able to reflect upon those, and then, have a peaceful life together.
So on the one hand, you have these intercultural competences which are not focusing on one specific culture, right? It's saying like empathy or other skills that you need just to interact with any other culture than yours. And then you also have this whole field of cultural knowledge, of knowing specific cultures very well. Would you say that this is also important, or is it more the overarching skills that are needed?
That's a good question, and a long theoretical discussion. So I think about 70 years in the field. So I believe both is important for our daily interactions, where we meet so many people from very different cultures, which we cannot all know in depth, and from different language groups. I believe we need a kind of general competence to deal with diversity and differences, and also seeing the similarities. And on the other hand, if you really work in depth with people from different cultures and specific cultures, you need to know how to communicate with people from these cultural backgrounds. The best would be to know their language, to know their thought styles, to interact on a very maybe efficient and effective way, especially in work contexts. I believe you need culture-specific knowledge as well. Yes, I think both is important, always depending on the context we are in.
Yeah. You also worked many years in intercultural conflicts, and you still do, I think, as a mediator.
Yes.
You also wrote a book, I think, about that I recently saw, about intercultural mediation. What would you say sets intercultural conflicts apart from other forms of conflict? What is so specific or special about conflicts in intercultural settings?
I think the complexity increases when we are going into the intercultural field, because our cultures actually impact so much on how we perceive conflicts, how we perceive communication, when we define communication as conflictual, how we express our emotions in conflicts, how we actually deal with conflicts, how we communicate in conflicts, if we are, for example, tend to avoid conflicts or rather attack in conflicts, or being defensive in conflicts. This is all not only impacted by our personality and our personal preferences, but also by our cultural backgrounds. And therefore, the complexity in intercultural conflicts is higher. Also, I believe that when we experience conflicts within our own culture, we might have an idea or our intuition how people might react within our own cultural background or our language group. And if we go the intercultural conflict route, we sometimes really do not know. It's like a black box. We do not know what to expect and what is going to come out of the conflict experiences, and how other people also interpret our conflict experiences.
Right. And before you talked about the similarities, but also the differences in intercultural settings. And I found it good that you emphasize that it's not only about differences, it's also about similarities. And especially in mediation, we always search for needs, right? What are the people's needs? What are their underlying values? And would you say that in intercultural conflicts, the really core needs and values are actually not so different from other settings? And is it more on a superficial level that you say like how people express themselves, how people behave and so on? Or would you say that also on this very deep level where we actually search for similarities on the level of the needs and the values, like the core of the conflict, is it still so different in the intercultural conflict compared to a German conflict, let's say?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite a complex question. So, and one that we could really debate about. I believe there are values and also needs that are kind of human, that people, for example, would like to be acknowledged, and they would like to be seen and recognized. And these are core needs and values that I believe are important across cultures. And at the same time, how we prioritize our values and needs, that might be culture dependent and dependent on our social upbringing and so on, and how important they really are within the different kind of conflicts we experience. But what you said and what I really believe is that often we focus on the differences in conflicts, and we actually, in mediation, as you know as well, being a mediator in these kind of contexts, we need to look at the similarities and really try to find our similarities and our values and needs we can really agree upon in terms of our priorities as well, and in terms of what these needs and values mean. I think one important part in intercultural mediation actually is to define what does it mean to respect someone, and what does it mean to acknowledge someone, and agree upon these terms that we use across cultures.
Yeah. I also think about value like family or these kind of important things for many people, which I think everybody can relate to, as you say. So I understand that this can be an important need, but I define it differently, or I also live my family value in a different way than you do or another person does, right? And
Absolutely.
what you also said before, I think it's a very good point to say that we arrive maybe at a level where the needs and values are at least relatable, or people can understand them, but they prioritize or they have another hierarchy of them. Maybe they say, okay, I understand that you also have this value, but it's not my most important one. But I can understand that it's maybe your most important one, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And you mentioned also the importance of empathy before. I think it's also in mediation one of the key tools and skills as a mediator, but hopefully in the end also for the conflict parties to resolve the conflict. And you also published several books about love in international relationships in transcultural settings. I know that you edited the book which is called International Handbook of Love, and another one which is the Unwrapping Transcultural Romantic Love Relationships. It's called. Very, very interesting titles. First, I would like to ask you, what is the difference for you between love and empathy? Is there a difference?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I would say there is a difference, because empathy is what we can really measure in terms of our emotional mirroring of the other. It is a kind of neuropsychological concept for me. I know there are very different ways of defining empathy and love, and it is not easy to differentiate, because often when we look at love concepts, and especially at universal love concepts like agape, for example, a kind of universal love that people maybe across cultures experience, we can say that empathy is often a part of love. It's experiencing and recognizing the feelings of others within ourselves as well, and being touched by them. But love might be going a little bit beyond that. It is a very difficult concept to really define, and the more I look into it, the more confused I get. But when we are looking at love, often it is rather defined across cultures as a feeling or an emotion that really makes us feel a lot of energy, makes us feel warm, that is often mentioned interculturally, makes us being attracted and feeling intimate with somebody else. So these are more broader aspects of love that might go beyond being empathetic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if you define love as a feeling or an emotion, how do you explain the long-lasting nature sometimes of love compared to an emotion that I can have when I'm hungry, for example?
Okay, yeah, love can be a short-term and a long-term emotion, and it always depends also on the cultural aspects. And I was just doing interviews on love and African cultural concepts, and I saw and heard a lot of people talking about love and how it can actually start. It can start as an immediate emotion that comes up when you feel attracted to someone, and to keep it on a long-term basis, love goes through different stages, and you always have to transform with a feeling and actually look at yourself and reflect upon the feeling that you are having, and if you still feel it's love or it's not love anymore. But really to define it is not so easy then as well. But love goes through different kind of transgressions and might change, and also what we across our life, and also how we feel love and how we feel about love really might change across our lifetime, and also with regard to different situations.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, love can be long lasting, but it transforms. That is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And how to transform it and how to keep it up is a lot of work. People across cultures agree upon that. That's for sure.
Yes. And so you said that love and probably empathy to some extent as well changes right throughout life. What about the comparison between different cultures? Does love and maybe also empathy work kind of the same way across cultures, or is it also different?
Love also works differently across cultures. For example, there are cultures which say that there's no love at first sight.
Mm-hmm.
So love can only develop over time by experiencing an increase in care, in nurturing, in feeling empathy for the other, for example, and thereby developing over years into a kind of love. Other cultures, and often we can see that in Western cultures as well, where people feel, oh, there is love at first sight.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly something that sparked and we feel love for someone, and then we have to develop this love. And after half a year or a year, we are going out of the feeling of love, and then we have to restart working for the love that we experienced a year ago. So there are different concepts. However, what seems to be quite stable across cultures and love is this very deep emotional connection to one another.
Mm-hmm. Another concept or topic that you discussed a lot in several books is shame. And the titles of your books about shame are quite positive. I was very interested because you call them the value of shame or the bright side of shame. What would you say when we think maybe more about the work context now? We maybe leave a bit the family and relationship side more into the professional world. What role does shame play in our professional world?
That's a very interesting question. And since I work often in the field of work and organization, I did quite a bit of research on shame in these kind of contexts. And what often comes out, if you ask people in the workplace, how do you experience shame? They say, oh no, there's no shame in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a little bit embarrassment, but there's no shame. But when you wait a little bit and you ask a little bit further, you can find a lot of shameful experience in workplaces. For example, people say, my colleague screamed at me and it was extremely shameful. Or when we are looking at women in leadership research and shame, we can see that a lot of women experience, or at least express in interviews and research, their shameful experience speaking in front of others and being reprimanded, for example, or having the feeling that they don't have to say enough, you know, or have to, or that they don't know how to say important aspects or highlight them. So these are shameful experiences where you maybe do not perform as you would like to perform, or where others criticize you. These are really deep-going shameful experiences. But we can also see that people mention in workplaces that when they've got a diverse background or they belong to minority cultures within workplaces, that they feel ashamed about being part of a minority culture, not being part of a majority culture within organizations.
Yeah. And where is the value and the bright side of it?
Yeah, my colleague Elisabeth van der Heijden and I, we wanted to look at shame in a positive way. We wanted to find out, how can we actually grow when we've got these terrible experiences she and I also had, I mean, in our lives. Yeah. I guess everybody does. So we wanted to find out, what do we do with these really impactful negative emotional experiences to grow and to transform these into something that is has got value for us or is valuable. And so we believe that when you've got such a negative emotional experiences and you start reflecting upon it, you start sharing it, you start working with it, you start, for example, creating symbols that help to transform these negative emotions into something that is positive, where you can find meaning within, then it can really develop yourself and your personality on a deeper level and help you to grow, internally and hopefully externally as well. And this is why we come up with these rather positive connections to shame.
Yeah. Would you have maybe one example or a practical advice for someone who is struggling a lot with that at work? Something easy that the person can do to transform these shame experiences into something useful?
Yeah, I believe, first of all, usually you have to acknowledge that you had a shameful experience. And often this is the first difficult step, because it is so painful or hurtful that we don't acknowledge, okay, this was very shameful, but we put it aside. So this would be the first step, to acknowledge, yes, that has been really shameful. I'm so embarrassed in front of all of my colleagues, and I have to live with that now. So this acknowledgement is the first step. After we can do that, and that can be really be painful in the first instance, we can go and look further. What do we want to do with it? What exactly made it so shameful? So go a little bit more into detail and go a little bit deeper. What are the connected feelings with this shame? Also acknowledge that. And then further on, you can ask yourself, after you've dealt with it, you can ask yourself, what is the meaning behind this? What can I learn out of this situation? What can I do not to experience it again? And what kind of personal growth does it need from within myself to overcome it? These would be questions you would work through, and it can take some time. Sometimes it depends on the severity of the shame you've experienced.
So in a way, shame is also a trigger to get to know yourself better, right?
Absolutely, yes. And especially the shadow side of our personalities that we usually do not want to look at or see, and transform them into a kind of light.
There's another book you edited, which is called Mistakes, Errors, and Failures Across Cultures. I think that it might be quite connected with shame, because we might also be ashamed because of mistakes or failures that we made or that we had. What does the cross-cultural research say about how to deal with these mistakes and failures at work? Is there like a general path for humanity? That's how everybody can do it, or that's what helps? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's also, again, very different. First of all, we have to acknowledge that this kind of research is research that is very Western. A lot of cultures wouldn't even spell it out that we do mistakes and failures and have them at work, for example, or even in our private lives. So this alone is a kind of, I think, quite cultural specific approach to look at it, what is not working. So there are very many differences across cultures. However, what we can see across cultures that is similar is that people try to avoid mistakes and failures, and that often the first reaction to having experienced our own mistakes and failures is to having a kind of defense mechanism not to look at them too much, or move on with our lives, or go out of the situation where we had to acknowledge that we made a mistake or had failure experiences. So this is quite common. People do not like to deal with mistakes and failures. And then there are culture-specific approaches. For example, in German context, often we can see that we spell out openly, oh, you've made a mistake. And then there should be an apology maybe, or at least we should acknowledge, yes, I made a mistake, and then we move on. In other cultures, we cannot deal with it so openly. Often mistakes are not even mentioned. We keep quiet about them. We are silent about them and deal with it on a different level. Or it's maybe sometimes even not in the individual who made the mistakes, but somebody from the family or from the colleagues who then makes up for these mistakes.
At the moment, especially in the West, there's a popular concept of growth mindset. You surely know that we should embrace the mistakes and the learning process, and like try to have a more positive approach to failures as well. Is that something very Western? And if so, how do other cultures deal with mistakes and failures compared to this approach?
I think it's quite a Western approach because it needs this openness to really look at it, to acknowledge it, to embrace it even. And I think it needs quite some inner development to really being able to do that. And I believe also, whilst it is a very theoretical concept in the West as well, a lot of people fail to embrace mistakes and failures in practice, because it is painful again. It boils down to negative emotions that we have and views that we might have about ourselves. And I think it is kind of a Western approach. When we are looking, for example, at African cultures, and we've got so many different ones on the continent, but usually mistakes and failures, yes, they are recognized, but they are not addressed openly, and they are not necessarily being seen as a personal growth that we can have from it, but maybe rather collective growth. But then it needs a lot of people not necessarily openly addressing the mistake or the failure, but rather keeping quiet about it and trying to make up for it on a different level. So there could be a very different approach to mistake and failures, but usually they are not openly discussed or debated or seen as a personal growth factor, but something the society would need maybe to make up for it.
Okay, but the mistake or the failure is recognized as such?
It really depends with regard to the context. If it is a failure that really the group you are in or the team cannot live with or cannot exist with further on, it needs to be acknowledged, but maybe not as directly and not necessarily connected to names of people who made the mistake. So it would be rather be a kind of general discourse about what could have been made different. And yeah, rather in terms of the state of the people who are being involved, that people come up with solutions without really discussing the mistake in depth.
Okay, interesting. It reminds me a bit of the first part of the Harvard concept to separate people from the problem, so that the person is not the problem. So there is a problem, everybody knows about it, but it's not necessarily connected to a person.
It's true. Yeah, it's a good connection you're making there. It is very, very similar, especially because a person within an African context only becomes a person through the other people. So if one person mistakes, it's always a group mistake.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also say sometimes when we make mistakes, just take it with humor. And humor is also a field of your research. I was interested because I like also to watch comedians and comedy, and I would be interested from a research perspective. Is there such a thing as an international code for being funny? So are there some things that everybody finds funny?
I would say there's no international code really. What is being experienced as being funny or humorous? But what a lot of people seem to like within Western contexts and also in African contexts, I don't think so much in Asian contexts, when people make fun of themselves. And others think, oh, okay, he made a mistake, for example, he can make fun of this mistake and of him or herself or themselves and take it with humor. I think a lot of people like that in many cultures, however, not so much in Asian contexts. I could see that. There's not really an international code, and I believe that humor is really a very difficult concept to deal with across cultures, because it goes so deep with in terms of your personality, but also in terms of your culture. And you really have to understand a culture in depth to understand sarcasm, for example, as a part of humor, or irony. And a lot of cultures don't even know what irony is. So it's difficult, but it's one of the most interesting aspects in research across cultures, in my opinion.
So if I come into a new culture that I don't know very well, would you recommend not trying to be funny?
I think it's always the best just to be who you are and to be natural in communication situations. But yeah, I would recommend don't try to be funny. Yeah, I think the most important aspect is to be aware and reflective about what you feel is humorous and funny, and how other people feel about it, and how they react to what you think is funny. And do you understand the jokes they are making or the funny aspects they are laughing about, and you don't even know why people are laughing about it? So yeah, I think humor is a great tool to know a culture better and to understand it really from within and in depth. I think that is true, and very difficult. It took me so many years to understand humor within South African context.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. And from some bad jokes, of course, also can conflicts arise, which brings me back to the topic of conflicts towards the end, because I know that you also work in mediation, and I find it a very interesting field, especially intercultural mediation. What would you say are the unique benefits of mediation in intercultural conflicts? What can mediation bring to the table as a tool of working with conflicts in intercultural settings that other forms of conflict resolutions or conflict mechanisms maybe cannot achieve?
I think the very first aspect that comes to mind for me is that in mediation, we try to bring people together. And a lot of different other forms of conflict resolution don't do that. And that is the biggest chance, in my opinion, to create peaceful relationships, to try and bring people together, although they might not want to talk to each other anymore, either in a setting together or in different settings where people help to communicate. I think that is really one of the most important aspects in mediation, and that we use the tool of verbal communication and really trying to explore in depth what are the values across cultures, and where can we get together, where can we find our similarities and our common goals and interests. And I believe that is one aspect of mediation that is very important. And also, I think that mediation is a tool we can find across cultures and in different cultural contexts. And that is also an advantage of mediation, that somehow people from all over the world can connect to the idea that third parties help to mediate in conflict situations, no matter if there are differences, who is mediating, how they are speaking. But it is a concept that really can be found all over the world. And I believe that is also in itself an advantage.
Mm-hmm. As you know, of course, intercultural conflict takes place in all kinds of fields. So in, let's say, family mediation, you have intercultural aspects. In business mediation, in all kinds of mediations, you can have intercultural aspects. But still, there's also this specialized field of intercultural mediation. My question would be, what sets intercultural mediation apart from other forms of mediation, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, okay, the most common definition here is that people believe that intercultural mediation is, or we talk about it when we have got people with different cultural backgrounds. And that makes it unique as an intercultural mediation already. However, I believe that in intercultural mediation, we cannot necessarily go with a Western or a German concept of mediation, but we also have to adjust our forms of mediation. And that makes it specific because in the end, we need to have a cross-cultural techniques that we use in or intercultural techniques of talking within mediation we need. And we also need a certain model of mediation that is adjustable across cultures and that can actually adjust with the people from different cultural backgrounds. And I believe that at the same time, we always have to be very reflective about the values that we are discussing and the way how we speak and what language we use. So intercultural mediation, in summary, is very complex form of mediation that has far more aspects involved than mediation that takes place in a specific cultural context.
Right. As a last question, I would be interested to know, what is your advice for people who want to improve their intercultural competence, whether at work, maybe also they have a transcultural romantic love relationship at the moment? What would be your main advice for people who really say, okay, I feel that there's maybe some lack of competence or something I don't get completely in an intercultural setting? Where would you start?
I think most of the people start on a behavioral level. That means, how do we greet others? How do we talk to each other? What language, body language do we need use, and so on. So I think when we are really looking at intercultural competence, we need to go beyond the behavioral level, and we need to really look at what we can know about other cultures. But and there we can read books, we can talk to other people, but there I would always recommend to talk to people from certain language groups of different social strata, so that you have got really people from different aspects of the society you are looking at, or at the cultural group you are looking at. But I believe still the most important aspect in intercultural competence is how we deal with our emotions. Because our emotions are created so early in our life, they are so in depth and deep rooted within our personality that we always have to take them into consideration in intercultural situations, be aware of them, reflect upon them, and try to find out what makes you maybe feeling irritated or angry or sad or happy within these kind of situations, and explore the emotions, because in the end, they are the disruptive factors if you don't know how to behave in a certain situation. And it's not the knowledge, which often Western concepts of intercultural competence overemphasize. And I believe we need to take the emotions more into consideration.
Makes sense. And would you recommend sticking to yourself, because you said understanding your own emotions? Or would you also recommend trying to interpret other people's emotions, which can be very tricky?
Yeah, I think first start with yourself, because if you don't understand yourself, you won't understand others. So going back to basic psychology. But surely, if you would like to understand the other person's emotions or concepts or cognitive concepts and behaviors, always ask questions if this is possible in the cultural context. and find out how they interpret their own behavior and thought styles and emotions, and try to find out more about them, so that in the end you might come to your own interpretations of what you have experienced.
I feel like in the end it's again a lot about these core things like empathy, open-mindedness, and these kind of values and skills, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It always boils down to that, yeah, human basic experiences.
Right. Claude, thank you so much for talking with me today. It was very interesting. I really want to read all your books now. Quite a lot of reading in front of me. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks very much, Paul. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to our cooperation in future.